Maybe I don't have we do. Good afternoon. Hi, this is the Speakeasy. Welcome to the 12:30 Speakeasy. And this is going to be the panel called Small Screen No More. First of all, I want to thank Junior Johnson's Midnight Moon, who provides the moonshine for the Speakeasy, and the Mad Popper. For those of you that have never been here before, the Speakeasy, if you need to go to a film, just feel free to get up and leave. It's a free forum. This afternoon's, it's going to be a very free forum.
It's really bright in here.
Are you making a comment? And I want to thank Molly Thompson, who's actually on the stage, for sponsoring this venue. I'm just going to introduce everybody very quickly for you. Lesli Klainberg is going to be our moderator. Lesli just became executive director of the Film Society at Lincoln Center. I'm going to try to ignore what's happening up there. Cynthia Kane, who's in from Al Jazeera, America, and Cynthia Lopez, who's been at POV for a very long time. Courtney Sexton, who's in from CNN, and our own wonderful board member, Molly Thompson from A&E IndieFilms. I'm just going to get out of the way.
Hi, groovy people. We will take our sunglasses eventually off, I guess. But it is very bright. Thank you for coming out, and I know some of you have already been here to some of the other panels, and there's another one coming up about funding that Ryan Harrington, I know we're so psyched about it, Ryan. We're so excited. One of the things I'm going to actually start off by asking all of our participants here to just talk a little bit about their companies, where they work, the kind of films that they're acquiring or producing, or however they're commissioning, I should say, and then talk a little bit about this idea of whether or not or how the landscape is changing for filmmakers. There obviously are more outlets, and so there are more opportunities, but how does that really affect filmmakers and their choices that they have, and what are the kinds of films that are being commissioned at this point? So maybe I'll start with my friend Cynthia Kane.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cynthia Kane. I'm a senior producer for the doc unit at Al Jazeera America. How many have seen Al Jazeera English or Al Jazeera America? So everybody knows. Okay, so we launched in last August. And we are part of the Al Jazeera Media Network's home base being Qatar. And Al Jazeera English and Arabic are the two international mothership channels. And we are the newest regional channel, although it's a very big region in the U.S. And we have Sunday night, we have a documentary strand called Al Jazeera America Presents. It is a kind of a combination of docu-series, limited series, generally 4 to 6 parts, and in between very carefully curated one-off docs. And those, generally we commission or co-produce the series. The one-offs we do acquisitions or co-productions. We're looking for timely, relevant social issue, investigative, stuff that opens up a larger conversation, be it international or domestic. But we have this great opportunity to, leading up to the premiere of the doc on our Thursday, Friday, Saturday nightly shows, to bring on the filmmaker, the characters from the film, people to talk about the issues, and leading up to driving viewers to the Sunday night, but also creating more of an event than just landing on a spectacular doc on Sunday night. So we try to do that. We've done that every week since we've launched, and looking for great stuff, social issue, investigative, that kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Molly Thompson, and I run features for all the A&E networks, and that means A&E History. There are other networks under our portfolio as well. Lifetime is a company that we merged with about 5 years ago. And, the genesis of the feature documentary division started when I think basically what happened is Survivor came along and changed television, and it's true actually. Then all the sort of 1 hour documentaries that had been a ratings staple for the cable television networks stopped rating, and so they had to figure out what to do, and so A&E started to try to find ways to, and then, as you know, now they're a reality powerhouse, but at the time they were really trying to figure it out. But it became clear that documentaries were not going to be the answer, and I know that's a hard thing to say to a documentary audience, but it's not necessarily the ratings answer for television executives. So the network wanted to find a way to continue to make great work. So they said, what happens if we just do a limited number of feature documentaries that can live in the festival world and in the theatrical marketplace, and then, come to our air eventually. But the primary emphasis being the theatrical and festival run. So that's what we do. We started doing that in about 2004, 2005. I see Ryan Harrington in the back. He was there. You were there, Ryan. And so we do a handful of films each year. Pardon?
Every time you say Ryan's name, you have to take some moonshine.
Oh.
Ryan.
He's not a real person. It's actually just a drinking game. The Ryan Harrington. So that's, so the network is, and I think that it's, we'll get into the conversation about the landscape later, but we do relatively few, and the films are intended to live on their own in the big bad world of the so-called theatrical marketplace, which I think is another whole question whether that exists.
And could I just follow up one quick thing? Is there a specific type of film? So, because Cynthia is looking for social issue investigative films, is there a type of a film that you would say, or?
We look for big, splashy, character-driven, contemporary films, and so we like to say we don't do issue films. Of course we do issue films, their issues are within stories, but we look for the ways to hide the aspirin in the applesauce. And
Hi, my name's Courtney Sexton. I work at CNN Films. CNN Films is a new strand within the larger brand of CNN that started a little over a year ago, and I would say we're some sort of combination between what Al Jazeera is doing and A&E. We are doing roughly 10 films a year that are either acquisitions, co-productions, or fully financing, and we want the films to have a theatrical life before, if they can. It's not going to happen in every case, but we see value in that. So we're really looking for films that have, whether it's social issue or investigative or a big splashy film like Molly's looking for, we want that sort of theatrical life first to build the profile of the film before it comes to us, and then we do our broadcast. And it's happening roughly once a month. So we're going out to festivals looking for acquisitions. We're looking for filmmakers that are at festivals like this to hear about the films that you're making. But I think the thing to think about for us is that we want it to feel commercial. We want it to appeal to a wide audience because we are in so many homes. But I think the thing that probably overlaps with Al Jazeera a bit is that we have all of these other programs on CNN where we can build out the film. So for social issue films, it's a really unique platform because it's not just air the film and it's gone. We can talk about it on Anderson Cooper or, our morning shows. So we're really also looking for films that have the ability to have a bigger conversation.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Cynthia Lopez. I'm the co-executive producer at POV, and I think most of you know POV's been around for 27 years on PBS, and we look for social issue, documentary films, for personal films, and often I say for films that reflect a reality that is very authentic about a community, a place, a person, or an issue. Right now, we're airing between 12 and 18 documentaries a year, and we have a second series that my colleague and I curate, which is called America Reframed, and it's 26 documentaries a season, and it's on WGBH World. I think to answer the question on what we're looking for and how we work with filmmakers, one of the tough challenges on PBS is just given the limited amount of broadcast time, we get about 1,200 films a year, and we're selecting anywhere between 18 and 20 a season. So it is a very sort of difficult road in terms of getting on to POV. But we have a very, very democratic process. So we have filmmakers each year that this is, that it may be their first film ever and it lands on POV because we've selected it editorially. During that same season, there may be another filmmaker that's had, 2 national broadcasts, have been, up for an Academy Award, et cetera. So it's very diverse in the type of programs that we do, and we've touched many, many issues. So that would cover what it is we're looking for.
Now, I think some of us who've been working over the last number of years have seen that there is a landscape that has shifted somewhat in that the transition I think that Molly was talking about maybe in the late 2000s was a movement away from broadcasters commissioning documentaries, and some companies that were in the business of having nonfiction just went out of the nonfiction business. I think you can look at IFC, who I will say myself, I used to do a lot of films for IFC, and then they just changed their business model, which is not our fault, it's just the change of the corporation, but it became more limited, the number of places that you could go in terms of broadcasters. And I think you'll notice that the reason I asked for what are the kinds of films you're looking for, and I'm not texting my friends or anything, I have my notes in here, is social issue, investigative, films that people want outreach, extend beyond the broadcast. Where is the place for other types of documentaries and nonfiction, whether it's about popular culture, historical documentaries. I think there are very few, and Cynthia, as a person who works at PBS, knows just very fewer availabilities for not only for funding, for even just broadcast, who will show a historical documentary of the kind of the American experience type. And even Susan Lacey from American Masters has moved to HBO. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out. But if you're looking at social pop culture documentaries, who would have made 20 Feet from Stardom? No offense, but not anyone on this dais. Maybe, although Molly, maybe, possibly, because you do some art.
Yeah, no, that falls within the realm of what we would have done if only we had been so smart as to. Thank you, Leslie, for pointing out that we didn't actually, that we could have.
I told you to take that meeting.
Well, I also think there's a huge challenge too, because while more and more documentary work is being made, there is sort of a rollback, if you will, of the outlets. So we're lucky today to have Al Jazeera and CNN as part of this panel, because it's the new ways documentaries are being acquired and distributed. But as you said, over the last 10 years, if we looked at many places, IFC, the Sundance Channel, many places, the Oprah Winfrey effort, we look at a rollback to see that documentary isn't always the financially, how should I put this? Many people I was thinking, I had a conversation last night at dinner on, someone talking to me about investing in documentary and wanting to figure out how financially they could make back their money. And I just said, we really need to look at a business model very carefully in terms of the production of documentary. And for us, given that foundations really support the filmmakers in making the work that they make that gets distributed on POV, it's non-commercial work. We're not concerned with trying to make the bottom line back. And so I think when we think about potential ways to distribute documentaries, we also have to think that while much more is being produced, there are limited access, but this notion that less people watch television is actually not true. If you look at Roper poll, last year, the year before, the average American watched about 4 hours of television. This last year, it's 4.7 hours of television. So people are consuming more television. It's just they're consuming it differently. And I think all of us have a challenge with that.
But you can't really talk about fewer outlets without talking about the new VOD outlets. I mean, in the same breath, I would argue that probably those 4.7 hours include 2.7 hours of VOD, right?
Or adding it on.
Actually,
No?
it doesn't.
It doesn't?
But it doesn't. But I understand what you're saying, because creatively, when you look at how people are accessing documentaries through Netflix, through VOD, it's really interesting. It's a much more complicated picture.
And Netflix, though, is acting more like a television network than a VOD platform these days. I mean, look how quickly they've transformed. You know, it's several chapters of the Netflix life so far, but lately they're more like HBO than like.
Yeah, it's complicated because they're the new premium channel, and yet sometimes a doc will air in its, say, hour-length version, say on Al Jazeera or maybe CNN or elsewhere, and then you could find the feature-length version on Netflix or another platform like that, or iTunes to download to own or rent, or Amazon, et cetera. So there's lots of new ways to look at that business model and actually hopefully make back your money if you're in debt, and that often happens, sadly.
Well, I want to think about when your film is done, there are certainly outlets for VOD. I'm looking at my friends from Fandor. There's a lot of, outlets for folks, even just a Roku box, right?
Yeah.
That they have different channels now. Apple TV, these different channels. HBO Go, you can watch every documentary that's ever been on HBO. That's a completely different way of viewing, and I think that's, to your point, is that we're consuming it differently. We're not turning on the TV at 8. We're, looking up on our Apple TV whenever it is that we want to watch, and those materials are available to us. But what about the production part? Because I think most of us who are making films, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are wondering how they get the money to make the movie. Could you talk, maybe each of you, about what opportunities there are in the sort of development and production part of what you do? Are you mostly acquiring? How much commissioning are you doing? And without asking too much, what are the ranges now? Acquisition prices have gone way down over the last 10 or 15 years. And I won't put you on the spot for numbers, maybe. I don't know, we'll see. But just, I think people need to kind of hear the real deal stuff a little bit.
Me first.
Without moonshine. But
So we're doing about 4 to 5 limited series during the year. Again, 4 to 6 parters. Those are mostly commissioned or co-productions. The commissioned ones belong to Al Jazeera Media Networks and will air on the other Al Jazeera's channels all over the world. And we'll probably do another 20 documentaries. Maybe 6 of those will be co-productions and the rest acquisitions. Because we're the new kids on the block, and we were trying to get on. Current TV was kicked off of Time Warner. We were trying to get back on Time Warner. They put some pretty heavy restrictions on us, and we do have a holdback once we premiere the doc for broadcast. So we've upped our license fees somewhat to sort of cover what you can't get for going on VOD or download to own and rent for a time period. So we're pretty competitive. I think we're along the line of POV, independent lens, that kind of thing. But we try to be competitive in the market, and without talking about price, I guess. But we are looking. We have literally 52 slots to fill a year. And aside from our strand, Al Jazeera America Presents, we have another strand called Fault Lines, which is a combination of current affairs, investigative reporting. It's a half-hour series with an embedded journalist, but instead of going out and creating like a news magazine show, they actually are working with real filmmakers, so they do commission projects too. So that's another way to get in the Al Jazeera door. And then Al Jazeera English also has several documentary strands, People in Power, Witness. They're always taking, pitches from people, and they look for a large amount of American stories too. So.
And can I just ask, it seems like you're basically saying, and I think all of you have versions of this, that you have multiple platforms that you're servicing as well, meaning that you're going to your sister stations. See how old-fashioned I am? I call them stations. The TV stations. You know what I mean?
Our sister channels.
Channels.
We do a number of co-productions with the other Al Jazeera channels, especially with the strands Witness. and People in Power, and those are more for our international docs that we do, just because they have far reaches worldwide. But we take pitches constantly. So and because we're so new, the best way to reach us is by email. So just email me. I'll try to get back to you and do a follow-up conversation afterwards.
We don't actually work with the stations. I work with the other networks. In other words, each network would commission a film, and we do very few. We do probably 2 to 3 to 4 a year, and we do high-end films, and we don't do a lot of. We don't put some companies put a little money into a lot of films. We don't do that. We do sort of the reverse, and because we have a limited opportunity to get our films out into the marketplace, and we think that fewer is better for us. But we don't actually do co-productions with international, partly because the films are intended for theatrical, and we're a TV company, and so it doesn't even really help our international networks to have a single 2-hour-long or 2 2-hour-long films.
But would you make a film you're saying is for A&E Films? Would it ever air on Lifetime?
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they could.
Right.
And I think most networks that you ever deal with, if you make a deal with them, they can air it on any of their networks. That's a pretty standard thing.
And how important is the web aspect of it? Do you have available films yet?
We don't do that yet. We haven't developed that side of the business yet. But I would suspect that it's something that we're interested in, and we just haven't developed it yet. I mean, the television takes a priority in terms of developing the digital, but so far it's driven pretty much by what the television programs are and supporting the programs digitally.
Right.
Yeah, so our funding is sort of, like I was saying before, it's acquisitions, co-productions, and fully financed films. And to sort of get in the fully financed section, we do development financing. So if you came to us with an idea that we are interested in, but we're sort of not ready to make the big leap, we can start out with a small amount of money to give you the ability to go out and maybe shoot something, get a treatment together, and a schedule and budget, so you can come back to us with a fully developed package. I would say that's limited. We're not doing a ton of that, but there is opportunity there. As far as the co-productions, a lot of that's happening just between talking to other people out, some international, like Sky, BBC. We could work with theatrical distributors. Occasionally, we'll do it, but they used to do it more than they would. Where we're financing the broadcast piece, and they're financing the theatrical. So there are various combinations of how we can get into this, but it is still very limited. With 10 films a year, there's not a ton of money, but I think we're sort of competitive. We're really selling the platform too, where maybe we're not going to spend as much as Molly would or say HBO, but we're really selling that we have all of these other platforms to talk about the film, and especially if you're doing an issue film, to get it out there in a bigger way than just the film. So we're also using that. And we do have a second strand, which is even more limited. It's called CNN Films Presents, and these are films from the past. Molly, we worked with her on The Imposter and did a second window. So we're also looking for great films from the past that we can either bring back because they deserve a second life, or maybe they didn't get the exposure that the film deserves. So we're looking for those titles to sort of sprinkle throughout the year. But that's pure, that's just, licensing.
But you said that you also make available, you're looking for something that can be on Anderson, Cooper.
So we really are looking for titles that we can build out, and I was just using Anderson because everybody wants their film to be profiled on an Anderson show. But there's just so much that can be gained from the exposure of people tuning in to watch news throughout the day, and to get exposure for these films on those programs throughout the day, and usually really leading up the week before we broadcast. It's just an opportunity that's specific to what CNN does, and we are building relationships within CNN to get our studio shows excited about the content. So
In terms of PBS and POV, just to step back, when you say sister stations, I would probably say sister series is Independent Lens. So how PBS thinks about independent documentaries is we have 52 weeks of independent docs a year, and that is putting POVs 20 weeks along with IL's 22 to 24 weeks, and then they do one-offs on the national schedule to round out the schedule where they're purchasing directly documentaries for a couple of weeks a year. So that's 52 weeks a year of independent work. Actually on the PBS website, there's a section that's called For Filmmakers that really has the history and PBS's contribution to the documentary world. But in general, last year, PBS had, it was somewhere in the range of 782 independent docs featured on PBS. And people, in terms of these facts, people don't really get these facts because we don't make them transparent to the general public, but there's a large investment of ensuring that documentaries are aired on PBS. In terms of POV specifically, we do really look at the life of a film, and we try to, as best we can, in some instances, provide development funding, and it's very limited. Our development funding could be anywhere between $5,000 to $15,000 for certain films where we go to a festival or a market and we're really like, we want to support the filmmaker to get to the next stage. A majority of what we do is acquisition, and then we do co-productions. So co-productions for us was Food Inc. We've done large films that are co-productions, and usually those are films that we sign on very early on. We work with the filmmaker to try to help fundraise, but as part of a co-production agreement, we're not asking the filmmaker that POV has to be the place where they distribute their television, where they do their broadcast distribution, but rather that we're a co-production partner and that we work with them, as in the case of Food Inc., throughout their campaign. And in the end, the director decided that POV was the place to broadcast the film. In terms of numbers, I mean, we've said this publicly before, but the numbers could range, and we're very competitive with everybody who's out there. For acquisitions, it could be anywhere between 50,000 and 170,000. That's sort of the range.
And could you explain a little bit about ITVS for folks, because that's a funding mechanism for people whose films are intended to be on public television, and actually it has to be on, if it's on public TV, if you get money from ITVS.
Well, there's a couple. I'm probably not the best representative because there's so many nuances with ITVS funding, but with public, right, exactly. Cynthia Kane can talk about that. But just in general, like with any other outlet, you need to see ITVS as the public funding source for independent work. So if any other channel gave you $75,000, $100,000, $225,000 toward the work, that work would need to be distributed in a public television venue. So, but not just for POV or IL, it could be considered for American Experience, American Masters, or any of the other quote-unquote icon series. There are various pockets of money at ITVS, and so there are various ways, and Cynthia's probably more able to answer your questions in terms of how to access that. But I would say, and I know this is streamed live, that PBS is a complicated sort of infrastructure to understand. So if I'm an independent producer, I always wanted to draw a map for filmmakers and have the map and say, here are the doors that you can enter. There's the POV door, the IL door, there's the PBS National door, there's the consortia doors, and then there's CPB door. And then there's a couple of investment people who like to fund public media, and then they have private doors that swing in different directions. So that's the best little quick map I can do for you in terms of how to get your film funded, but definitely myself or Cynthia can talk to you about how to swing open any one of those doors.
It seemed unfair to ask you, Cynthia, that question since you were.
ITVS is great. I mean, the only reason I'm not there is that they don't do international co-productions anymore, and that's what I did. But they're a great source. They have lots of funding rounds and get all the information on the webpage. They're terrific to work with, and your film airs on public television, which public television is available to every single home in America. So, and I'm now working for the public. Well, if I was working for Al Jazeera English, it's the public television of Qatar. So it's kind of the similar missions. So I guess.
And the last thing I would say about POV and IL, I mean, we specialize in ensuring to really focus on the filmmakers' credentials, their career. Often when we are taking on a film, we understand we're not just taking on the film, and that once it broadcasts, we never have a relationship with the filmmaker. It's like we're building relationships with filmmakers throughout the life of that documentary. And for us, the life could be 4 years, 3 years, depending upon the contract, that we're working cleverly to do what I call passing of the baton from the festival distribution through the theatrical distribution, through the broadcast, through educational distribution, and then in the community. I have to encourage that with ITVS and Independent Lens, when you look at what POV and IL contribute to impact films and what we're able to do, it is very different given that we're public media.
So impact is the word I've heard many times over the last year maybe, but it feels like it's percolated up over the last week more than anything else, is this idea of impact, and the docs that a lot of folks here are commissioning and working on are about social issue investigative work that is about impact. And I'm wondering if one of you can sort of articulate what you mean when you think of impact and what you're looking for in a film related to that. I'll start with Miss Sexton over there because she's looking like she has something to say.
Yeah, I'm just looking at you because you're talking. I wouldn't say that CNN is necessarily impact specific. We understand the value that comes with a film and the ability, and we're of course sensitive to it for the filmmakers because that's typically why they're making the film. At the end of the day, it's honestly ratings and
that's impact, though,
advertising dollars, so it's a different type of impact. Yeah. But we also see the value in how that draws people in, and that's why I say social issue, because for our platform, and that's not all that we're going to do, it's a great outlet for that. So if you're harnessing the ability to have impact and the filmmakers getting what they want out of the film and we're getting what we want out of the film, that's a success story for us.
I think there's so many questions about what impact is. And so it's like, well, what does that mean? Do you want to change legislation? Because there are some films that have been made that have been seen by arguably fewer than 1,000 people in its whole lifespan, right? Yeah. And yet they have a tremendous impact on legislation or on the public dialogue. Then you have, I think there are other films. I think one of the big things that we all have to face is that some of the films that are made probably have no impact. I think that I think that there are some films, and I've seen a study on this on certain films that have literally the same people who thought about that issue, who were interested in it before, who cared about it, and who believed in it, are the same people who watched it, and you're never able to cross out of that. And I think it's when one of these studies or brain trusts comes up with a way of crossing out of that, that's when I think you can have a conversation about impact. Because otherwise, you're preaching to the choir potentially, and that's frustrating. I don't think there's, people might not want to look at it that way, but I feel like until you actually face what it is, define the conversation.
Sure. I would say for us, we try each year to sit down and really define the goals of what the impact is. Mm-hmm. But, in terms of broadcast, for instance, our lowest rated film is a .04, say. That's 400,000 people. And what we try to do is make sure to fine tune who those 400,000 people are and what the impact is. We don't believe that every single film has necessarily, a policy or a legislative change that we want to make, but we want to get to the audience that can use that film to do positive change in local communities. I know IL works in the same way in terms of tailoring information. I think the most recent study that I read about impact is Bertha Foundation's impact report, which is on their website, and I encourage it's like 50 pages. I encourage people to read it. It profiles the Invisible War and then some smaller films and looks at impact in that way. But I agree with you. I'm a numbers person. I want to know how many people it reached, what was the change, what was the goal, very specific way to analyze impact. But I do believe the documentary community, when I think of an article that's written, even for the most prolific publication compared to a documentary that's done, they're very interesting when you start looking at impact.
And of course, these are, again, a certain type of documentary and nonfiction, and that's sort of a little bit of the conceit of this particular panel, which is that we're really talking about certain kinds of films. Cynthia, did you want to add to that?
No, I just think we don't talk about impact so much as that, Al Jazeera really prides itself on being sort of old-fashioned journalism, where we're not going to tell you what to think or how to think it, and we try to do that with the documentaries too. There's this very high bar of journalism, and they expect the same from us in programming, where we want to take a subject and put it out there, and put it out the facts. Again, not telling you how to think or what to think, but open up a conversation. And if that conversation becomes more of a discussion or a big debate, all the better. And I guess that is its own form of impact. And we're seeing that across the nightly shows as we bring on, sometimes characters with diverse opinions that appear in the documentary, or experts. We did a show. We did an investigative piece on Lockerbie and what really happened, and the investigative unit that created this documentary came up with some very surprising things. And one of our nightly shows, Consider This, was very, very explosive, and it was fantastic. But people really tuned in, and it makes people think. It goes away and makes you think for a long time. And our first series is rolling out, premiering on Sunday night, April 13th, called Borderland, and it's all about the Mexico-U.S. border, and I think it has the same potential for being explosive and controversial, and opening up that conversation so that people do think about the subject, and again, it's its own kind of impact.
Do we have a microphone over on this side of the room if people want to queue up there for any questions that you have for our illustrious panel? I do want to circle back and ask you, maybe, because this is I keep thinking about these movies that aren't about social issues, and how nonfiction filmmakers can work in an environment where it is harder to get funding for films that don't have a kind of payoff that people sometimes are looking for with outreach, but also the limited number of broadcasters that are looking for those kinds of films. I'm just thinking about, some of the films that you've done, Molly, are obviously cross over to art and culture. Maybe you could talk about Supermensch, actually. I was just wondering, because that premiered.
Well,
to me, that's a very,
we had a great screening last night. Were you at the screening?
I wasn't at the screening, but I heard all about it.
Yes, well,
I think Shep might even be
I
here.
think Shep is in the back. So if anybody... If anybody hasn't, for those of you who haven't seen the film yet, you're in for a treat. Sometimes what we do is we go with the director's vision. And what happened to me is I was in my office one day, and somebody said, they ran in and they said, "Can you come in David's office? Mike Myers is in there." And I was like, "What? No, I can't go in there. I'm not ready to meet Mike Myers. I can't meet. He's an idol of mine." And so we went in. I of course went, and he had this film that he wanted to make. And now, some filmmakers might find that frustrating. Like, of course you made Mike Myers' film that he wanted to make. But it's not obvious that somebody like him would make a great film. But he had a passion project. He wanted to make this film. He has, he's such a wonderful creative force that and he's so disciplined about story. He's such a student of story and narrative that he always, from the very first time he told us what the film was going to be to the very last time, before, to all the rough cut edits that we went through with him, he really had a vision for the film that he wanted to make. So those are, and we do that with a bunch of films. There's a film that we're doing right now where I was not that interested in it. It was an issue film. I didn't get it till I saw the footage. And the director had a vision that made me think, okay, there's a film there. This is not an issue story. It's much more of a character drama, and that's what interests me. I'm interested in ways that nonfiction can be as broad and as appealing as possible. And I happen to believe that a film like Supermensch kind of lifts all ships for documentaries, because it reminds people in the broader culture that they love nonfiction films, and so that it's actually it's good for all kinds of films. And
No, I agree, and I think I was thinking about 20 Feet from Stardom, because that film is a similar kind of thing. Like, it does uplift you. It's very inspiring, and in some ways, it's a backdoor, right, to talk about African American women in the 1960s in the music business, as sort of a backdoor way of doing that, but with a very entertaining and engaging and very honorable mission, and from my perspective, in terms of what he was trying to communicate, but artfully done. But not necessarily, I wouldn't know necessarily who would pay for that. I mean, in the long run,
Who would finance that
who
film?
would finance it?
Right. So there's not a she means there's not a built-in constituency. It's not like the water
Right.
conservation people. Oh, okay, you can definitely go to the water people to fund a film about water. Like, who are you going to go to for a film about, singers in the music business?
Yeah.
That's the value of companies. I don't know how they finance the film, though. Actually, do you?
No, I don't. I know Radius bought it. And I thought they
Right.
acquired it when
I
it
think
was
they
complete.
acquired it, yeah.
Which leads to an interesting. Right. Okay. So he
So
financed
an
it.
individual.
The producer. Right.
wow.
He knew it was going to go to Sundance, but he'd wanted to make this film for decades, I think. And yeah.
Of course, Shep knows the answer to the
Of
question.
course, and Shep knows him, and he's worked with him, and he probably produced a movie with him.
So that's a film funded by an individual, which is how a lot of
Yeah, we
documentaries
might acquire
do
something
get,
like that,
you know?
actually. We just acquired a film that I thought was so not Al Jazeera, but was funny and irreverent, but had a social issue kind of tucked in sort of
Yeah.
as a subtext. And, because people should be, humor can hook in an audience in such a huge way. And I love to be immersed. I want to cry, I want to laugh, I want to be entertained as well as, be enlightened.
Yeah.
So.
Well, for us,
Oh, sorry.
the last thing I'd say is POV is on Mondays at 10 o'clock. And so the programming team, every time we meet, we had one film that it's called Ping Pong. And I remember when the vice president of production, Chris, came and he said, Cynthia, you're going to love this film. It is about people over 85 playing ping pong. And I just looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? And we're on Mondays at 10 o'clock at night. And he said, no, it's really funny. They're very angry. They're irreverent. They're, all of these things. And I was just like, and the average age is like 90 years old? And he said, yes. He said, but you have to see it. And of course, when I saw it, it's a wonderful piece. So for us too, there isn't a one size fit all I don't want the audience to leave that we only do social issue documentary film and you have to change the world to get onto POV. That's not what we do. If you look at what we're streaming currently on our website, it is the full range of the best of documentaries.
I would say we're the same as well. Definitely not. It doesn't have to be social issue. We did Life Itself, the Roger Ebert film. And that was an interesting financing structure, too, because we were the first money in so that Steve could take that money and then leverage it to get other money. So that's also another way that we can be in a modest way, but give the filmmakers the ability to use that to then go out and raise the other money.
I was going to make that point because I think that's one of the major values of the television fund companies is that we will finance films, either development or finance them in the beginning. Theatrical distributors don't do that ever, almost, or maybe once, but rarely. And so there's a lot, I think, within the documentary world, there's a lot of friction between the sort of purists and then the TV people. We're sort of considered, another caste by some people. But I don't know where they think that people magically find the money to make their films. Television networks is a much easier place and we expect for people to be paid.
Well, I think also most of these, as you've heard most folks say, they want you to have your films at festivals. They want you to have that exposure. So it's not a limiting thing where somebody says, we want to air your film on CNN Films, and that means that's the only place it'll ever be seen. That's the beauty of it, is that they really are looking for that wider range. Yes, ma'am. You want to ask a question?
You mentioned that CNN does development financing and Al Jazeera does pitches. How do you go about actually getting the chance to show our film to you, and what do we need to have prepared for you so that when we get the chance, we're ready for that?
That's a good question. Well, emailing me is the best because I have a record of what you've sent me. But usually starting with a proposal, it doesn't have to be, extensive. It can be a sort of starting off point, a rough budget of what you're looking for. And that's a good place for me to start and know if it's potentially going to be for us. And then if it's okay, you need to go in a little deeper into this, or we're going to give you development money to go deeper. But those are sort of the two things that I need to know initially is generally what is this film going to be, and if we're interested, I can work with you to get it, further along. If you come to me with a fully developed treatment, that's fantastic, but I don't want you to feel like if you don't have that, we can't start the conversation.
So you don't necessarily have to have any footage available to show you,
No,
just a really good
No,
treatment.
I mean, you can, but it's not a must. Yeah.
And the other question I wanted to ask is if there are specific people who are involved, should you go ahead and contact those people to see if they'll sign on before we contact you?
Meaning the subject of your film? It depends on what the film is about. I mean, if it's just a prototype for the type of character you're going to be following, then no. If it's a movie about Shep Gordon, yeah, I would want to know that he's going to be a part of it. So it sort of depends on the level of the subject that you're working with.
Okay, thank you.
How many of you are familiar with IFP Independent Film Week? Do you all know about that? So I just to say that that's just one example of a really terrific forum for documentary filmmakers to meet in person and up close. These folks, but also obviously people from throughout the community, the film community, distributors, broadcasters, festival representatives, and there are numerous pitch forums that you can look at. But I think in comparison to the narrative world, we're relatively friendly, more or less, and accessible. And I think that doesn't mean that you can get your movie made right away, because don't confuse accessibility with the opportunity necessarily to get your film made. But I think that there are opportunities throughout the year, and particularly I think Independent Film Week is just one of those really terrific things. If you have a film, it has to be pretty well developed in order to apply, and I think you have to have a cut too, don't you, to get an Independent Film Week? Yeah. So it's like, I think you have to have at least a 20-minute version. But there are labs, the IP Doc labs, there are many other labs that other film organizations run, but those are where you start to plant the seeds with broadcasters, let them know what you're doing, get them familiar with your piece, and then as you develop your film, you can keep people updated on your progress. And it is true that there was a time that you could get a film commissioned from your proposal that was written just on a piece of paper, but I would say that that's more the exception than the rule. I don't know anyone now that doesn't need to have some footage shot of something in order to get their film really commissioned and made. I think there are always exceptions, because there are some filmmakers that have, reputations, been making films a long time, but it really has changed. I definitely feel that way over a number of years. Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to see what kind of opportunities you had available for short films, and how that process is different than acquiring or commissioning features.
Sure. At POV, we have something called POV Shortcuts, and we do it once a season. And for folks who have shorts, we encourage. We have a rolling deadline for that. So again, my email is listed in the in the materials. But you can shoot me an email. Just definitely write, short submission, and we'll have one of our producers get back to you in terms of tracking. More and more, we have a partnership with StoryCorps, so they are producing animated shorts for us. But in addition to the animated their shorts, we package other shorts.
We don't do shorts for Al Jazeera America, but Al Jazeera English, particularly the Witness strand, they both commission and co-produce half hours, and I think they do. I don't know if it's up to 52 a year, but they do a lot. So and Jean Garner is the person in the U.S. to contact. I can give you her email if you like.
We haven't done it, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think it would just be on a sort of, we would have to see something that was obviously meant to be a short, and we'd have to really want to do it, and we'd find a way to do it.
It's just a bit premature for us, but we're going to be doing shorts on the digital platform, and there will be a relationship between CNN Films and that digital platform, but I don't think they're quite ready to start talking directly to filmmakers, but it's imminent. So if you contact me, I can at least let you know when it's going to happen.
And one last thing, there's something called the Doc Challenge, and if you go to the Doc Challenge website, basically there's a call for entries there's a limited budget that the Doc Challenge group gives out to produce shorts. Then they select, I think it's 3 or 4 winners. POV gives a yearly award of $1,000 for the best Doc Challenge short, and that gets on our website. So there's 3, I should just be clear, there's 3 ways that we work with short material. It's either POV shortcuts for broadcast, POV shorts for online, or the award itself, the Doc Challenge Award.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for doing this. This was a really good speakeasy panel conversation it was to be a part of. At some film festivals, I think you can get that conversation as just kind of fluff, and I thought this was really good. I wanted to thank you for moderating really well. A few years ago, I heard about a concept called sustainable communities, which are kind of like the new form of intentional community, but centered around living a sustainable lifestyle. And, you know, that's kind of something that like the public realm is really interested in now. And so I followed this couple that had sold their house and their car and got on bicycle and decided they wanted to move into a sustainable community, and they wanted to know where. So we went to 100 different sustainable communities around the country, and while we were doing that, there was impact, you know, we're meeting all these people and getting like people while doing it. We were raising awareness, and Dick Clark Productions hit us up. I don't even know how that happened. And they were like, we're interested. They cut a reel, and I think at some point actually pitched it to an A&E, but nothing ever really happened. So we just moved forward with the film and have been doing sort of like community outreach. We raised money on Kickstarter and used that same community to create like screening kits where communities who were interested in spreading awareness around the film could do their own screenings, but it still wasn't a big deal. We've done about like 150 screenings around the country. Right now I'm in this interesting phase where I'm like, is it too late to go to spread awareness through broadcast? Is that too late for me at this point? You know, we have a film, we've shown it in places, but so I don't know whether to just go ahead and self-distribute, put it on DVD, or if it would be good to approach something like a broadcast network.
We're really interested in all things environmental, climate change, sustainable. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you.
Cool.
It's not too late for us. Yeah, I mean, 150 screenings, that's just the tip of the iceberg for the,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not too late for us either. We've had films that have robust sort of engagement campaigns prior to broadcast, so love to talk to you as well.
So if people were able to get the DVD now, is that the too late point?
You just have to be from our perspective, you just have to be really careful with that because, you know, again, I always say, look at that contract
Right.
and what you're signing off for. Yeah. And don't, I would, me personally,
it would be ourselves. We wouldn't be doing it through anybody else. It would.
Sure. I would probably be really careful to sign off your DVD rights without having a broadcaster sort of solidly in place yet. We don't buy DVD rights, POV, so it's not like I'm saying that because ultimately we would want to buy them. It's more so once the DVD distributors see that we're signed on, what doors that might open, and so you want to be careful with that.
Thank you, because I think for me right now, it's like I'm so interested in the subject, and I think it's such a hot topic that if it's too late for that film, that I probably would create another film that had a new life, you know? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Actually, Lesli, I wonder if everybody could talk about that. It brought up a really good point that I know a lot of people talk about with broadcast, which is, what if I sign away my rights? You know, when that filmmaker gets approached at a festival, especially with the plethora of online platforms, and they'll often ask them to sign a broad release on rights. And I wonder if you guys wanted to talk to the filmmakers about your opinion about that, with, you know, how much you sign away and when.
You mean festivals ask people to sign away digital
No,
rights?
not festivals.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, when they get approached by there's so many new online VOD platforms, and they'll say, here, sign this, and a lot of their rights are tied up in that, even though it's only an online VOD platform that approaches them, and they ask for a broad acceptance. So I just thought it might be an interesting thing to point out in the last couple of minutes.
So you mean someone signs on with Netflix, but or another service, but
But it's
would
service
A&E
asks.
Films still
Correct.
be interested? And I
No.
would think I even know the answer to that.
No,
Yeah.
that's you're selling your film basically. That is the major value of your film now. You know, is VOD. That's the majority of the value. So nobody, I think I can speak for everybody. Nobody would take it, right? Would you?
Well, again, I appreciate you being so honest. I really have to say, Molly, I really
Right.
appreciate.
Well,
No,
that's what I
because
said.
I've seen people.
Oh yeah, sure, we would take it.
No, because I've seen people say, "Well, let's have a conversation," and then it's like, no. But for us, I would caution for public television. We're not saying if we can't get your VOD rights, we're never buying your film. We're not doing that. But it really will impact the full, in a case like this where you want to have a full, quote unquote impact campaign. There could be various kinds of deals on the table, and it's going to limit that. So I would caution it, and I wouldn't encourage it. We're in a situation right now where a filmmaker has signed off his VOD rights and a couple of other, rights, and it's like we're stuck trying to figure out how to make this contract work.
Yeah,
And some of it is a timing window, right?
Yeah.
Just to ask that. It's this when you do that versus when the broadcast is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so because we need a U.S. television premiere, so we can't have it on a VOD platform first.
Yeah.
And we do have a holdback because now the cable, Dish, Direct, they're all very, very nervous because of the whole Netflix or the other online platforms becoming premium platforms. And it's very, very complicated. So kind of really know what you're signing. And but for us, we take U.S. television rights and some catch-up VOD. We don't take the VOD rights, so you can sell those later. But then again, sometimes the big VOD platforms want the premiere as well. So it's complicated. It's getting more complicated.
I would say as a rule of thumb, don't do it. But if we really wanted a film, you always figure out a way to make it happen. But I would say don't do it because there are very few films that fall in the category of we're going to fight for it.
Yeah.
So.
Another honest answer from the panel. Any other questions from our? All right.
This is a bit of a philosophical question. It goes back to something Molly said earlier in the session. But I'm a journalist and not a filmmaker, so I've got less of a dog in this fight. But let's say I've got two topics. I'm totally passionate about both of them. I want to make a film, but I know because I've worked with the networks and stuff that this one over here, it's topical. It's going to be topical for the next 2 or 3 years. It's going to produce eyeballs. So I make the decision to go ask you guys that one. Does that mean that because of what you do in a de facto way, you're moving the marketplace so that people start making not necessarily what they want to make, but what they can make?
All right. That's very deep. Okay. Let's just take a
Sorry.
I have to take a breath.
That's why I said I don't have a dog in this
Let me
fight. So
just think about
we just ask the tough questions.
It is a really
Then
deep.
I guess the flip side of that would be that we would make films that we think people should see versus films that they might want to see. And is that the right thing to do? Because is it my job to decide that regardless of what you might want to watch, that you should watch a certain type of film? Maybe
I don't know.
that's
It's your aspirin and the applesauce, not mine.
That's my new T-shirt for the summer, baby. Aspirin and the applesauce.
I think you should be able to do both. I think you should be able to make a challenging film that people want to see, and that's the holy grail. I don't think you should have to move, the whole sort of genre in a direction that demeans the value of the films, if that's what you're suggesting. But
Or
No, I'm just being pragmatic and saying if the marketplace, if people like the guy said about they rob banks because that's where the money is, because it's it's where the funding is. So you may still have an emotional investment in this topic, but that in a de facto way it maybe moves the marketplace a little bit or the construct a little bit.
I do think that's how commercial television works. I do think that's a fairly good description of the way things get made in commercial television. I would argue that it's somewhat different in this specific field.
I mean, that's a way to make a living, definitely. But I think what we're all looking for is something that bold and audacious that's going to surprise us in a big way. And if I may use a POV example, the act of killing, which, so many people did not believe would ever get funded, ever get actually finished or made. And whether you like it or don't, you remember it and you'll discuss it, and and bravo to POV for having the courage to air it.
I would just say, you know, on average in the documentary field, the films that get broadcast on POV take somewhere between 5 years and 25 years. Like the film that took the longest amount of time, Ellen Curris's film Betrayal, took 25 years, right? And then the Apted Pieces, he's in 56 Up Land, right? Those folks have dedicated their lives to following the subject matter. And there have been many times throughout those, whether it's 5 years or 12 years or 15 years, where they've wanted to give up that project because they just couldn't, and they stuck by it. And definitely there were times where that subject area was not in vogue. So for documentary fields, I think your question is a little challenging, because I think the passion that exists by the filmmakers that are here is that they'll stick to a subject matter regardless.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I'm right now a PhD student living at the coast of eastern North Carolina. And there I'm starting a community project to have high school kids that are minorities do their own films, and do their own films about their community and about mostly the associated problems that they have within their community, but also related to the marine environment, which is where they live. So we teach them film skills, and we also teach them marine science and marine conservation. And at the end of the program, at the end of the summer program, they will be producing their own short films. So I was wondering if that sort of films would be something that would interest you or somebody within your networks, or if you have worked with somebody that has done similar projects anywhere else.
There's two people that come to mind quickly. There's a project called the Mira Project, and if you search it on the web, the director of that project is a guy named Roberto Arevalo, and he used to do the same kind of model in the public housing projects in Boston. And that project existed for like 10 years. It got into various museums at Lincoln Center. You know, the work was distributed in very interesting ways. So the Mirror Project, it would be great if you could tell Roberto I suggested you speak to him. And then Educational Video Center in New York has, really trained young people for many, many years. It's probably going on 25.
I think they just had their 25th anniversary.
25th anniversary. And so it's Educational Video Center. And then in terms of PBS and how they acquire films about youth, made by youth, I'd have to think about that. But if you have my email, last month alone, I was looking at statistics, talk about impact. And right now we're seeing that it's somewhere in the range of 187,000 young people download per month information from PBS Kids from iPhones and iPads. That was in 1 month. So in terms of this type of material being material that's needed, definitely PBS Digital for Kids was probably where I'd direct you to, but I'd have to find out if that's Kevin Dando or who it is. So if you email me, I can get you that information.
And MTV is also a very good source for nonfiction around youth, and they're still one of the only places that really does still commission and acquire actively nonfiction for youth. So that's something to think about. And I'm getting the sign that we have to stop. So thank you. There's moonshine back there.
Thank you to all
Don't
of you.
forget.
Thank you.
Thank you.